Good afternoon. So call the meeting of the Management Committee for today, it's June 22nd, 2022 to order. And on this wonderful, hot, muggy, sticky afternoon. And we have a kind of short agenda for today. So let's just see if we can move this quickly and effectively. The first order is I'm going to ask for folks if there's any changes or corrections to the agenda for today. No? Okay. So the next step that we have is approval for the June 8th Management Committee minutes. Do we have a motion for that?
Yes. So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any changes, comments? No? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Excellent. We don't have any non-consent business on the agenda for today, but we do have two very interesting and important informational items. The first one is the update on the 2021 equity grants, and we have several folks that will be speaking before us. Do we have Laura Vedder? Okay. Robert Carey, Ashanti, Payne, and Koski. So, yeah, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Welcome, thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, my name is Koski from the Human Resources Workforce Development Department. It's my pleasure to open this afternoon's presentation. We're excited to share with you the progress and initial successes of this Advancing Equity in the Region project. These three individual departments, involved departments and staff, approach this opportunity with professional and personal passion. We see this work as our contribution to the real and lasting change that the Council strives to make in our region. This interdepartmental partnership is a demonstration of the power and impact of effective collaborations. And at the intersection of these three projects lies the Procurement Department. Procurement leadership and staff deserve the lion's share of recognition for these successful projects. They have embraced the challenge of balancing these innovative ideas along with maintaining their high level of standards that their office has earned. So with that, I'm going to pass this off to my colleague Laura Vedder and Rob Carey.
Next slide, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. First, I want to thank you all for the equity grant funds. We wouldn't be here today if we didn't get those funds to fulfill these projects. I'm really excited to be here today with these teams and share the results so far of the financial incentives in MCA Goals pilot project. I will discuss the framework and initiation, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Robert Carey to discuss implementation and initial outcomes of the pilot. The Council may establish financial incentives for prime contractors who exceed the MCA goal for use of subcontractors. Prime contractors are those that oversee contracts, and they also oversee subcontractors working on those projects. Currently, the Council enforces non-compliance of not meeting the MCA goals, but statute also allows for incentivizing for exceeding the goals. Procurement in the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity requested funds to pilot MCA financial incentives and contracts. The purpose of the pilot was to gather information to determine if a formal incentive program could increase opportunities for MCOs. The slide you are seeing on the screen represents the measurements that we are using to assess the pilot project. We have been able to collect some of the measurements so far. Some of them we can collect at time of proposal and bid of the project. And then we're also collecting some as the project moves forward and then upon completion of the project. Some of those initial measurements we will be sharing with you later in this PowerPoint. Next slide, please. On this slide, you'll see how the funds were divided into categories of service for this initial pilot. We had 2 categories of service, construction and professional technical services. So far, we are piloting 4 projects. 1 is still in process, but 3 have been completed to the point of contract execution. Out of the $125,000 given or granted for this project, we have obligated $100,000 of incentives. For each project, incentives were capped at an additional 10% above the MCOG goal. And the incentive dollar amount, as you'll see, is $2,500 per additional MCOG participation point for professional technical services, and then $5,000 for construction. Now I'm going to turn it over to Robert Carey to discuss the contract language, selected projects, and the initial outcomes.
Thank you, Laura. Mr. Chair and committee members, I share the level of excitement to be here today to present the information in front of you. I'm going to discuss the implementation process. So as part of the project development, Procurement partnered with the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, as well as the Office of General Counsel, to implement new contract language that defined the roles and responsibilities of both the contractor and the council to ensure the success of the program. The projects that we identified for this program were selected with the intent on gathering information and outcomes from a variety of service areas and divisions. This included Metro Transit, Environmental Services, and Metropolitan Transportation Services. These projects were targeted for their ability to allow an inclusive scope deliverables in categories of service that we had previously seen success in MCOG commitments. This was really a shared partnership with each of the divisions that supported the program. We were able to highlight this pilot within the market during our pre-solicitation meetings. These are hosted by council staff, and they outline the solicitation requirements, discuss the project specifications, and respond to plan holder inquiries. The project success wouldn't be achievable without those partnerships. I'd like to thank Marilyn Porter, Jim Harwood, Amy Venowitz, Charles Carlson, and Lisa Thompson, and Chris Remus, as well as Adam Gordon, for their support in embracing the project. Okay, so the information on this slide gets me extremely excited. So it showcases our success. All right, so the first of those successes is the effectiveness of the preliminary work on the front end of the project implementation. The second is the interest in the participation in the projects with measurable outcomes. So what are some of those outcomes? What we saw is that all solicitations issued under this financial incentive pilot generated multiple offers that exceeded the MCOG goal requirement. As an example, let's take the 2 construction projects that are showcased here. There were a total of 10 bids received. Of those 10 bids received, 7 of them exceeded the goal requirement. Specifically, for the overhead door replacement, we had 7 bids, 4 bids exceeded with the offer that we awarded the contract to, committing 7% higher than the requirement. For the, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Chair. Mr. Chair, might I ask questions as we go, or?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And this is, I get excited about this as well, so thanks. So just on those 2 construction projects that you used as an example, and the high level of proposal that exceeded goal, is that, you're probably getting to this, is that more than we normally would have seen in just a regular open bid project without the pilot?
Yes, so I think to Mr. Chair, committee members, the question is, did we see an excess of goals with the incentive by comparison to without the incentive?
Correct, at the bidding level.
Absolutely,
Cool,
yes.
thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. So for the regional maintenance facility expansion project, there were 3 bids. All 3 bids exceeded the project requirement, with the awarded bidder committing to 4% higher than the requirement of the goal set. For the service projects, where the highest ranked proposer is the method for selection, rather than with the bids, it's the lowest cost to the council. The Equity Evaluation Regional Transportation Investment Project had 7 proposers, and 5 of those proposers exceeded the goal. The awarded proposer offered 9% higher than the requirement. And of note, the requirement was 20%, which is a significant requirement in a service level contract, and then to see an excess of that of 9% is a good number for us. So, and then last is the project for art, and that has yet to be received, but we expect a similar level of interest and commitment based on the initial outcomes or previous outcomes that we've seen. So, what does this all mean? To put it into perspective, the data in front of you supports a total spend by the council in $77,500 of incentivizing contracts that generated an additional $875,000 to MCA vendors. So that's an innovative project approach that allowed for the continued focus and effort to reduce those barriers with those targeted businesses, and that's to meet the council's goal to increase those partnerships and spend with underutilized businesses in the region. At this time, I'll turn it over to Aaron Koski, who will discuss the council contractor apprenticeship reimbursement program.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, committee members, this CCAR program is, I believe, a very innovative way to kind of maximize our connection we have with our contractors on capital projects. As many of you know, the capital projects built with any state funds are subject to workforce goals that is monitored by the State Department of Human Rights. We wanted to take a chance to influence the diversity, increase the inclusion of those union construction trade members, especially apprentices who enter the industry, apprentices of color and female. So, while we don't use the word incentivize, we prefer to use the word recognize the extra costs these contractors assume by taking on someone who's brand new to the construction industry. So we recognize the loss of productivity, the increased training that is required for a brand new apprentice by providing a reimbursement of up to 1,500 hours on a scaled grade with a total possible reimbursement of $11,250 per eligible apprentice. For this pilot program, the Building Strong Communities program, a construction preparatory training program that we have developed in partnership with the Minnesota State Trade Unions, celebrating its 3rd year or 4th year this year. Those graduates are eligible then to be reimbursed. Next slide, please. This is a very innovative, as I mentioned before, way of incentivizing and recognizing and assisting with the inclusion of tomorrow's construction workforce. And it took a lot of effort, both the procurement department, equity and equal opportunity, and the general counsel to develop the process, develop the program, the appropriate support documents, contract language. And we had success this year by executing the first contract with Mca Contracting, who hired last year's graduate, a female labor apprentice, who worked on 3 environmental service projects to a total of 338 hours, which resulted in a check to Mca, the hiring contractor, of $1,817. Next slide. Last month, we graduated our 4th cohort of Building Strong Communities individuals, and we have over 20 placements and apprenticeships starting in 7 different union craft trades. 11 of those apprentices were hired by 8 contractors who frequently work on Metropolitan Council capital projects. We are currently engaging with those 8 contractors and anticipate to have CCAR contracts executed with these contractors this summer. We're very excited not only for this year's work, but to have this work continue as the Building Strong Communities program is positioned to only increase in size and scope moving forward. I think I'm now turning over to Ashanti.
Thank you, Aaron. Chair, committee members, Ashanti Payne, Assistant Director with the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity. And definitely, like my colleagues, excited and pleased to be here to talk about the work that we're doing. As Aaron mentioned, procurement is kind of the common thread that ties this work together. The other commonality that I think is important of note is that all of these initiatives and projects take us beyond just regulation and compliance, and that is something that is absolutely critical to make progress because compliance and regulation alone are not going to get us where we need to go. Having said that, one of the first things that the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity did is create a new unit that's going to help us have our impact reach beyond just the regulatory and compliance functions of our office. The Engagement and Development Unit, since May of last year, has been a one-person shop, but we're excited that very soon that's going to change. But I don't want to diminish the work that has already been done by that unit thus far. Next slide, please. So for this fostering Mca Businesses, there's 175,000 identified, and really this is going to be directed outreach, engagement, technical assistance, support services, access to resources for certified small businesses, Mca firms, to help them compete more effectively for council procurements. The other thing is that we want to leverage these funds with other partners in the region that are doing some of this work as well. So Department of Administration, who now operates the PTAC program, DEED, MnDOT, City of Minneapolis. We can leverage these funds by both allowing the businesses that do work with the council participate and take advantage of the programming that's going on there, and vice versa. That reciprocity is going to make that 175,000 go a lot further than it would just on our own as the council. Next slide, please. So status so far. The EDU manager, we currently have an offer out, so hopefully we'll hear something back from HR any minute. Would be wonderful. And then we've had, like I said, a program specialist that has been on board since May of 21, that has been carrying the unit and doing some great things with support of others. And then we will be recruiting for a third position for the unit next month. One of the major things that we did is we conducted a survey that included both small businesses and larger, longer established prime contract holders, and got information to see what are the barriers, where can we improve. But also, one thing that's important is it gave us an opportunity to establish some baseline information so that we can see, are we building capacity in these businesses? Are they growing? Are they competing for more contracts? Are they hiring people to take on for that work? And we've also, through that survey, it actually was the driving force behind our strategic plan in identifying what programs we're going to use those funds for. So for example, the bench program, which we're actually just now going to be piloting that process with IS as a partner. And basically what that is we're not setting goals on the contract. We're going to have a goal in terms of Mca participation, but that's going to be managed and operated by the IS department. They're going to take the responsibility for doing that. And then we're also going to do the outreach to identify those businesses that'll be able to work on that master contract to ensure that we can meet that goal that we have for the business. Bidding and estimating training was something that shot to the top of the list in terms of small businesses and what they said they wanted to receive assistance in. And then, just our experience in asking the questions specifically on contractors, large and small, participating on the Green Line Extension project. Huge project, can be very tasking for our small businesses to get through the right process, to make sure they get paid in a timely fashion. So change orders and pay applications training is also something that we saw as significant and that we heard back from participants. And then building capacity in areas where there's need. We know there are areas where we don't have enough businesses, period, to do the work. So we want to focus our efforts at recruiting Mca Businesses, identifying, understanding what the requirements are, and getting them into those areas to build that capacity. Next slide, please. So in terms of measuring how we'll measure our success, of course, bottom line is always what does our council spend and how do we spend it with the various MCUBs and disaggregate it so we can understand exactly how we are spending our money. Increasing the number of MCUB bidders, number of contracts, and some of the things that we know have worked for us in the past, like mentor-protege relationships and building capacity. That's why I say that getting that baseline data was also important to understand the size and nature of the firms and the amount of the size of the contracts that they have historically bid, so that we'll be able to measure that now over time. I think that's my last slide, and with that, we'd love to take any questions that you have.
Any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the work on the presentation. And it just amazes me with what a small amount of dollars, how much you're able to accomplish. And I look forward to expanding the pilot and seeing how it really is impacting the whole ecosystem that we're working in. And I think, for me anyway, I can kind of see the beginnings of that in this data. So that's very encouraging. And I have a question specifically about the trades and the training. And I don't have this fully formed, so I hope this kind of makes sense. But I know that the trades themselves are trying to do the same thing that we're trying to do, and I think that's really exciting that we can kind of couple our efforts here. But I'm just wondering if you have a sense of if our investment, if our priorities, if our being clear about what we're trying to do is having any impact on what they're trying to do, or contouring with their initiatives, efforts, and investments to diversify their benches, or do we not have a sense of that yet?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lilligren, thank you for your question. Having worked closely with I would say the local trades, they are invested in diversify. They no longer see it as something they have to do. They see it critical to the future as demographics are changing. The challenge is that they really are out of shape on how to effectively recruit. As we all probably are familiar with, unions really support those who have family members, neighbors in the trade. So I think we've played an important role, and we've done some teaching, if you will, on how to present a career in the trades to the uninformed public. And I think that our help has been appreciated, but more importantly, they're starting to learn their lessons for themselves. So I do see a steady increase in their ability to attract and retain women and people of color into the trades.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Lee?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks everyone for this great presentation. I have a comment and a question. My comment is just that I really applaud and commend all the great and innovative work that you all do in this area. And on slide 5, for financial incentives, I noticed that the Community Development Department is not one of the targeted departments that's listed, and I was wondering if that was a conscious decision, or is some of their professional services may not fall in line with what we're trying to do here with that department too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Great question. Part of it was timing as well. It wasn't that we weren't interested in piloting on a community development project, but it just didn't simply happen to come across during our timetable we were looking to target. If the pilot was expanded or we have an additional 25,000, we would certainly be glad to pilot it on another division department's project as well.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
You know, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So that, and I thought maybe there's gonna be a slide about, but, so this is a pilot, right? That's what we do in government, we pilot things and then we see how we can sort of expand them. And so I'm just wondering, what is next? Or will the 2023 budget include, expansion of a pilot, or are we gonna start implementing some of these initiatives and measures within departmental budgets? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. We are reviewing that question right now, and this presentation certainly helped us get a better grasp of exactly what we still need to gather in order to effectively present the information for our leadership to make that decision or make any recommendations.
Okay.
But we are certainly seeing the success, and it's really exciting. And we're really looking forward to soliciting feedback from the prime and subcontractor community to learn more and then provide a final report.
Great, thanks. And Mr. Chair, just to Councilmember Lee's point earlier, to me, like my half-informed or semi-informed perspective, I can see where the areas where we actually provide sort of not services, but we actually have system in transit, transportation, environmental. We're actually running things. I can see where there's easier. It may be easier to implement something like this, and so something like community development, where it's sort of a different sort of environment and skill set. It may take a little more time, nuance, to figure out how to implement some of this there. So I'm very supportive of seeing what those recommendations are. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments? I just have actually two comments. The first one is on the incentive program. How's that process again? So we take like the lowest bidder and then look at their hiring incentive. How's that interplay evaluated? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. So when we're looking at the bids for projects, we simply start with the apparent low bid, and then we evaluate that bid for its responsiveness to those bid requirements. And one of the components of that responsiveness is whether or not they met the goals. In this case, we're incentivizing those bidders to exceed the goals with that financial incentive. And so the low bidder that was responsive to those bidding requirements also exceeded that goal.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. And I just have a different question on the NCOP fostering initiatives, and just wondering about what we're doing. I mean, there's a lot of work towards businesses that are already in place, folks that are just trying to, that are already working, but we're just trying to make sure that they can bid in our projects or be subcontractors or even prime contractors in some of our projects. But my question is, are we thinking about folks that are not there yet? Are we helping mentor potential entrepreneurs, folks that might be thinking of opening a business, that might need assistance with more basic things like how to get insurance or how to get a license or anything like that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. We did not spell that out in this particular effort, but the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity are doing some of those things. An example would be some work that we did with independent truck operators, ITOs, just based on feedback that we received from industry partners. In terms of that was an opportunity for possibility for those folks to start their own business, start their own trucking companies. So we translated some documents into Spanish and Somali just because those were the two languages that were recommended. And we worked with our Title VI administrator to make sure that we were following the right steps in terms of which languages we chose to translate. And then we've also re-engaged an outreach program in terms of connecting both with potentially certified businesses and newly certified businesses that just got certified. And what we found is that it's driving a lot of traffic to we have a designated inbox for OEEO, for the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, for questions, inquiries about opportunities with the council. And that's driving a lot of traffic to there, to the point to where we're having difficulty keeping up with those responses. So we are doing some of those things, and we look to do some more in expanding in that area.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
I just have a question here. When you're taking the bids and maybe your one wasn't chosen, do we do anything else to follow up with the ones that maybe were just the cut below the one you did choose? Or do you keep them in a database, or do they start all over again if they want to bid on something again?
Good question, Mr. Chair and committee members. So with bids, we select the lowest responsive bidder. The understanding amongst the market is if you are not the low bid, you would not be a recipient of award. But for our proposals, where you are selected on the basis of your of being the highest ranked proposer or offering the most advantageous solution to the council, we do offer debriefs. And these debrief meetings are scheduled with the project managers and the business units and that vendor to go over the rationale behind the recommendation. And another pilot program that we've had since about 2020 is that we intentionally offer debriefs to any MCA that submits an offer for an RFP that's not selected for an award.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much. Very, very good work. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We have the next informational item. It's the 2023 General Purposes Levy Strategy and Preliminary Regional Administration Budget Allocations. And we have Ms. Henderson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. I am Marie Henderson, the Deputy CFO here at the Council, and today we're going to talk about the levy strategy and the regional administration budget allocation for 2023. So I think been here long enough or been through the cycle that there's actual statutory date that we have to meet. So this is just the first of the discussion that you will have to learn about the 2023 budget and our strategy. We'll be back at the end of July to talk about the general fund. We will have the big council presentation in August before the statutory and adopting of the preliminary budget and the levies. And then they'll be open for public comment after you hear the capital program and final adoption in December. And I do want to really acknowledge that there's a whole team behind me that is standing, and Stuart McMullen and the budget team are really preparing, and this is a whole year process. So that when we're all done, we will refer to the proposed operating budget as the regional administrator's recommendation budget as required by statute and submitted by the council for approval. And ultimately, as we go through the public comment to final adoption, this becomes the council's budget. So I want to spend some time on our council levy strategy. We'd like to change it just a little bit this year, and I'll talk about the 2 points that I would like to talk about for changing. But first of all, we have a strategy. We have our debt service, which is for our transit bonds and our park bonds. They are limited by statute, 40 million for parks, and the last statute I pulled was about 98 million for transit. So we have to meet those obligations for making those payments. In the past, we've always had a strategy of maximizing our general purpose levy. That is the most flexible dollars that we had. You just heard about pilot programs that we can do. So having that strategy and still having that strategy going forward is still in the proposal. We'll talk a little bit about livable communities demonstration account, changing a little bit on that strategy, and holding historically a 2% levy. Now in 2020 we did 0% through the pandemic, but then up that last year to 2%, and having a strategy still holding at 2% and still making a recommendation for that strategy. So just taking a little bit about debt service. If we were to hold the the 2% growth of the levy, and being very conservative in today's market of a 3% rate on bonds, you can see there'd be very little growth in all of our levies except for transit. So we just have to keep that in mind and look at the pressures. Think about the debt with the non-debt piece of the levy and the debt piece. It's kind of a big teeter-totter, and make sure that it gets balanced, but we have our programs that we need. And parks, like I said, is capped at 40 million. We've had bonding authority. We did not bond in 2022. We typically bond in springtime, so I can say that even though the year's not done. We bond for cash flow. And right now, just the proposal for the levy is to cover the parks payments in this year. So livable communities. Now, in the past, the strategy was to reach a levy goal of 13.2 million. Because of the implicit rate factor, and I'll get into that, we surpassed that and is now at 14.1. And actually it's a little bit higher because as of today, as luck would have it, the implicit rate factor came out. So our calculations are a little bit off on these slides, and when we come back in June, we'll show you it's about $28,000 difference that we're talking about today overall. But instead of having that strategy of holding livable communities at that 13.2, we're saying maximize that levy also. It will help with the LCDA program, which is the Local Housing Incentive Account. We have, by statute, have to move $1 million from the general purpose levy into this account. And the second piece of this is from the general purpose levy to move $500,000 in to help with inflation and costs. So not only with this account strategy, again, moving it off of that a set goal of 13.2, but to have it max out what's allowable, and then to get $500,000 from the general purpose levy. So changing the strategy just a little bit.
Mr. Chair? Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ms. Henderson, for just on that last point. So looking at the statute, the two that are listed as statutory transfers, those aren't discretionary for us at all, right?
That's correct.
The $500,000 is discretionary
Right.
for us. Okay.
Right.
So that's a decision we'll need to.
That's a decision.
Thank you.
So the general purpose levy, just looking at that, like I said, we max out for the implicit price deflator. I will tell you, in past years, it's been 1 to 2%. In these slides, what we're estimating is 8.3. And just today, to the back of my notes, it's 8.47. So it's raised up quite high based on a lot of inflation factors that we are experiencing. With the general purpose levy, again, this is our most flexible dollars. Most of this is used for paying for community development and HRA administration. Again, that local housing incentive piece of that. And that would leave then around $2 million, which in the past has been for piloted one-time projects. Again, the strategy is to not use them for one-time projects, but to put them into a capital investment, mainly for our computer systems here at the council. To start being part of the solution, as we look at upgrading some of our systems that haven't been upgraded for multiple years, and for the divisions, we'll be paying for a lot of that, and to have the regional administration, the general purpose levy to help pay for that solution. So that's the second piece.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, thanks, Ms. Henderson. So the capital investment, are those enterprise-wide or are those specific to any division or department?
They would be enterprise-wide.
Thank you.
Just want to also give you kind of a perspective line. This used to be the old dollar bill, if you remember that slide. But basically what it's showing is where your taxes come from. Mostly is going to be your county, city, and school district. The special taxing district line is about 2% of everybody's, about 4% of everybody's taxes. We are part, meaning the Metropolitan Council is part of that special taxing district. We're at 2% of that bottom line. That's how much impact we have for the net capacity of the state. So kind of putting everything together that we just talked about, if we look at the proposed 2023, now keep in mind it's not the 8.3, it went to 8.7, yeah. So very minimal, but still for discussion purposes today, just starting out with the strategy. We maximize our general purpose levy. We do not have to levy for our highway right-of-way fund. We do have enough reserves to cover any commitments or grants that would need to happen in that area. And we haven't had to levy that quite a few years now. The demonstration account, instead of again holding that at 13.2, we'd max it out and hit about 14.1 million for 2023 levy. And then the tax-based revitalization account, again, that is not from taxpayers, that is from industrial businesses to help pay for cleanup. And we receive 5 million of that. Again, the teeter-totter then is the bottom side of that is the debt service piece of that. So if we want to hold our levies at 2%, then the balance basically goes into transit. Parks at that 1.7 is going to cover debt payments for the following year, and transit then would receive to balance out the levy. For this year, I think the proposal makes sense to be at 2%. Again, economic factors are always going to push between the non-debt service piece and the debt service piece. So as we look at buses, and I'm hearing statistics that it could be up to 40% increase in cost for buses. That would increase our debt service. There's also pressure on livable communities and housing, and so where's the balance? But right now it looks like it's good at 2%. And that is the proposal for the levy and the strategy. If there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll move to the budget allocation.
Any questions? No? Okay, thank you.
So the regional budget allocation, that's regional administration, and I'll make sure I explain what departments that those cover. In 2023, it's 92.3 million, and it's a 6.3% increase from year over year. And how this breaks down is the regional administration is administrative services, and that includes the management overall council decision making, internal review of the council programs and finances, legal representation and relationships with other government agencies and the legislation. There's business services that includes communication, community relations, and recruitment to retain council employees. There's financial services that includes budgeting, accounting, financial reporting, procurement, and risk. This also includes real estate. And then we also have our informational service department. Our budget is more than 57% in salaries, and within contracted services fall within our council-wide costs for hardware and software licensing and maintenance. So talk about a little bit of the change from the adopted budget of 2022 to this preliminary budget of 2023. Like I said, it was 6.3%, the total bottom line. You'll see the salaries is one of the bigger items at 8%. This is due to some new positions in the budget, and I'll get into the details about that. And then having an overall strategy of a 5%, the 2% increase in overall salaries. And contracted services is up, and that is mainly due to communications for website design and paying for contractors to help with communication strategy services. I really want to point out that our CIO, Craig Vance, IT maintenance, to have a negative amount year over year is pretty unprecedented. He has really taken the time to look through the budget and really eliminate things that were not needed. Pretty impressive. So what happens with regional administration costs is all those costs are allocated out to all of the divisions. There's a small amount in other that is not, and that's mainly Treasury Department, some interest, and we also help reduce the allocation costs with a rebate for our credit card program. So each division gets a share of basically overhead and have been informed about what their 2023 budget will look like. The percentages are the same as last year with a little switch, and I mean like a percent between Metro Transit and MTS. The allocation method is really about primarily done on full head count for support for each of those areas. And then to talk a little bit about the headcount increase. In the regional administration budget, there's a proposal for 14 new headcount. Some of these do have budget impacts. Some of them are temporary employees that are moving to full-time, and those do not have budget impact because they were put in as a different line item. They're not underneath salaries, they're underneath contractors. So in the proposed budget, it includes an April budget amendment, which you've already heard, for adding 2 audit headcount, adding a manager position and an auditor position. 1 in procurement to add as a new principal contract administration position. 4 in OEEO, 3 EO consultants, and 2 of those have been converted from temporary positions to permanent, and 1 assistant director. 4 in HR, 1 human resource business partner, 1 deputy HR director, 1 moved from temporary to permanent, and 1 moved from Metro Transit to HR. And 3 additional headcount in IS to move 2 headcount, the temporary positions to permanent, and 1 service portfolio manager. Just a different viewpoint of headcount by each area within regional administration. And that is my presentation today. So if you have any questions?
Any questions or comments? I just had one question, because you mentioned that the capital, what was it? That the levy was used for some capital investments such as the computer system? Okay, thank you. Can you tell us more about that? Okay.
Mr. Chair and committee members, I know that our CFO has been talking to IS about our systems. I think you have a nice vision if you'd like to share it.
Sure. Mr. Chair, committee members. So part of my review over the last 6 months have been really trying to understand what are some of the challenges that we have within the council from a one council perspective, from an enterprise-wide perspective. One of the challenges we have is we have a system or systems that really need looked at and really need to be updated. We have multiple systems in finance, we have multiple systems in transit, we have multiple systems that do really duplicative work with a numerous amount of interfaces that puts us, quite frankly, at risk. I've been working with Craig Vance, our CIO, to really understand, what is that is needed, and really have the team from IS work with the divisions so they can understand what the division's needs are. So from an approach of the business dictate what the needs are, IT will come in and provide technology to assist with those needs. And that's happening as we speak, and that's gonna happen council-wide. And every department, every division will have a discussion at 3 different levels. They're gonna have a senior level discussion, completely separate. They'll have a middle management, supervisors, managers discussion, completely separate. And we'll have staff discussion, completely separate. All those meetings are going to take place to gather information. Because what is important to a senior level is, from a systems perspective, is gonna be different than what's important for a frontline staff, what is needed from a system to perform their work. So that approach was taken because it's, as I've spoken with some of you already, IT is costly, and doing an ERP or enterprise resource planning upgrade of our systems is gonna be quite costly. So we need to start putting some reserves in place to make sure that we can get to where we need to get to and not really come to you and say, hey, we need $100 million by tomorrow. So we wanna just plan ahead, put some money in reserves, so that way, as we are creating these new systems, we have the budget there ready to go. So that was the approach that we took. And part of that is just gonna have the money there so we can kind of start planning ahead. Because this is gonna be probably a 2-year plan to really understand the needs from a systems perspective and how do we get there, in a nutshell.
Thank you. Anything else?
Mr. Chair, I just think that's such a smart approach. I run a little nonprofit, so it's like a little over $1 million a year. We're facing the same thing. When you kind of develop your IT solutions as you need them, and then you get to a point where you have nothing that can really interface or coordinate, and so it's much. That's why I was really impressed, Ms. Henderson, with the year-over-year reduction in IT maintenance. Because that's where some of those costs sit. So not doing what you're talking about, I think, is very, very expensive and risky. So look forward to supporting that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you very much for the presentation. I think that concludes the agenda that we have for today. Anything else? Any comments, suggestions, gripes, concerns?
Careful what you ask.
No?
Not right. He's here a while.
All right, so I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.